Negotiations for the next round of coronavirus relief fell apart on Friday. The White House and congressional leaders remain divided over what should be in the deal. Skylar Henry has the latest.
The White House is doubling down on the president's threat to take executive action if no deal is reached on a coronavirus relief bill.
He wants a payroll tax cut. He is concerned about the eviction moratorium threat.
The president says he has executive orders ready to go to address evictions, unemployment insurance, and student loans if the talks with Congress fail. Democratic leaders criticized the threat, saying executive orders would be weak and insufficient.
They can't spend money, they can only forward money. It is much better, and our colleagues admitted that yesterday, to do a strong, robust bill.
The bill's overall price tag is the biggest sticking point. The White House started at $1 trillion, with Democrats wanting a $3.4 trillion package.
The House Speaker says so far the White House has rebuffed her offer to remove $1 trillion from the Democrats' proposals if Republicans agree to add $1 trillion to theirs.
We must meet the needs of the American people. We could come down some because we can change the dates of expiration, the rest of that.
Is that a non-starter for you? That's a non-starter.
Why?
More than 30 million Americans are out of work, and many say they don't know how they'll make ends meet without the extra federal spending on unemployment. The Small Business Paycheck Protection Program, which is designed to keep employees on the payroll, is set to expire on Saturday. Skylar Henry, CBS News, the White House.
To discuss how things have fallen apart and how they may still be saved, Major Garrett and Nancy join us now. Major is CBS News' chief Washington correspondent, and Nancy is CBS News' chief congressional correspondent. Great to have both of you with us. Nancy, I'm going to go ahead and start with you. Where do lawmakers stand on negotiations right now? And is there a chance that unemployment benefits may be retroactive to cover this period when an agreement is in fact made?
Well, the two sides hit a pretty serious speed bump today, Lana. Basically, they sort of agreed to take a pause in the talks because they felt they weren't going anywhere. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi saying bluntly, come back to me when you've got a better offer. And the White House saying they're going to try to go it alone and have the president sign a series of executive orders designed to do a little bit of what they were hoping to achieve with legislation. This doesn't mean that the talks are over. They've agreed to continue to discuss, see if there's some way around this impasse. But right now, what we're looking at is 2 weeks of negotiations with very little to show for it.
Very little indeed. So, Major, let's go ahead and jump off of what Nancy was just saying, the possibility that President Trump will decide to go it alone and sign executive orders on COVID relief. What kind of relief can President Trump actually provide?
Well, he can do things with payroll tax withholding, which would provide a bump in what you would receive in your paycheck. So if you're getting a paycheck, that helps you. President Obama did that during the Great Recession. There are some aspects of executive power the president could exercise there, basically on tax collection, slowing it down. That's not a permanent solution, and it's not as generous or as visible, and this is an important distinction, generous and visible, as the plussed up $600 per week of employment benefits. The president could also extend moratoria on eviction notices, at least within federal housing, and could do some things with federally backed student loans. But the White House knows that that is not as good or as durable or as visible as doing a piece of legislation. And Nancy knows this as well as I do. In protracted budget negotiations, everything looks terrible until there's a breakthrough, and everyone has a downcast attitude, and you really don't get a sense that things are moving until they move right near the end. One thing we know is true. The executive action threat is real, but the Senate Majority Leader, Mitch McConnell, said the Senate won't adjourn. What does that tell us? That Senate Republicans and the Senate at large, but specifically Senate Republicans, are waiting to vote on something. Why does this matter? Executive action does not allow any Senate Republican to vote on anything. And Senate Republicans are in political jeopardy, just as President Trump is in political jeopardy. They would like to vote for something. So one of the countervailing factors that the White House has to weigh here is if the president goes alone, he is clearly and distinctly and politically going it alone, meaning he's not sharing any of the residual political benefits of creating a deal that Senate Republicans, some of whom are up for re-election, would like and possibly need to have going into the November campaign. That's one pressure point. Now, on the Democratic side, they also know that if they overplay their hands, they could lose the leverage they have. And Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer today said, we'll go down $1 trillion. That's a sizable concession. And it helps Mark Meadows, the Chief of Staff, and the Treasury Secretary, Steve Mnuchin, to go back to the president and say, Mr. President, they gave up $1 trillion. Let us keep negotiating. Don't go down the executive action route just yet. There is, though it doesn't sound great, there is some movement behind the scenes. And coming down $1 trillion is not chump change. That's a real concession. Will the White House find that enough? No, clearly the rhetoric isn't. But it is movement, and movement matters.
Well, let's shift gears a little bit, but your point is well taken, Major. And as Nancy and I both acknowledge, certainly for people who don't have jobs right now, they're counting on some relief. And a payroll tax cut isn't going to help in terms of people who need unemployment benefits and assistance. But a lot to get to. So, Nancy, let's start talking about what some congressional Democrats are demanding, which is an investigation into the U.S. Postal Service. I don't think we started this year thinking that that would be one of our headlines. Can you explain what's at stake and what lawmakers want?
Sure. Well, lawmakers want the Inspector General of the Postal Service itself to do an investigation. They're also investigating some of the recent policy and staffing changes that have been made at the Postal Service. They argue that the new Postmaster General, who is a big donor to President Trump, has a personal stake in competitors to the Postal Service. Private companies, they say he and his wife have millions of dollars in assets in those companies, and they want to know whether any of that has affected some of his recent decisions that they say have slowed down service at the Postal Service. We're talking about things like cutting overtime and reducing route service. They believe that there's something funny going on, and they also worry that this is going to have an impact on mail-in voting in the fall, which, of course, is already an extremely fraught topic because people are afraid in some cases to go to the polls. They're worried about their health in the midst of a pandemic. President Trump, as we know, has really been on a soapbox about mail-in voting and has said a lot of things about it that are untrue, trying to discourage states from going that route. And so this is a hot button issue right now, and Democrats are upping the ante by calling on the Inspector General of the Postal Service to look into this and by saying that they're going to do their own investigations.
I think very few people would have anticipated that the Postmaster General would be a post that would become so politicized. Can you tell us anything more about the Postmaster General, Nancy, and how he got into that position?
Sure. Well, the reason that you're absolutely right, this hasn't been a particularly political post in the past because usually it's been filled by someone who has worked in the Postal Service for a long time, is very familiar with the agency, and has sort of come up through the ranks. It's such a technical position that you don't usually see someone like a big political donor being put in that role. You usually see somebody who has a lot more experience with the nitty-gritty of the Postal Service, which is an extremely complicated organization which has had such financial difficulties for decades. And so right off the bat, putting somebody in there this close to an election, this dedicated to President Trump, it was always going to be seen as a political move. You had a couple of members of the board of directors who abruptly resigned. That also raised some eyebrows. And while the new Postmaster General is insisting that the changes that he's made are simply for fiscal responsibility and haven't really had a huge impact on service, what Democrats and Republicans alike are hearing from their rural constituents in particular is that they have seen a slowdown in service. And the interesting thing about this issue is that it doesn't necessarily cut right versus left the way issues so often do here in Washington. You have Republicans and Democrats who really care about these rural voters for whom the Postal Service is a really big deal. And you can get both parties up in arms when you mess with that 6-day service. And so this is an issue that Democrats are determined to drag into the spotlight, and it's not going to go away anytime soon.
And Major, as Nancy set you up so nicely for my next question, there are political undercurrents, of course, to the Postal Service right now. This news all coming as President Trump continues to attack mail-in voting, except in Florida, where he's been encouraging it and where he himself has voted via mail-in ballot previously. So tell us more about what's actually going on in the politics there in Washington.
We'll get to the politics in a second. This also has implications for our first topic, which are the budget negotiations about what kind of spending will be included in a deal if one is reached. House and Senate Democrats also want money for the Postal Service to increase its capacity to handle what everyone knows will happen this fall. What is that? That we know is going to happen. There will be more ballots cast by mail. Absolute fact. That's not a bad thing. It's a good thing because jurisdictions are moving more toward mail-in balloting, even if they haven't done this in the past, for safety and health reasons. So House and Senate Democrats say, well, if that's going to be a reality, we all know that it is, the Postal Service should be buttressed in its ability to carry out that task. Historically, as Nancy accurately pointed out, a bipartisan task. Mail delivery has not been a partisan issue in this country, ever. But because of the president and his particular appointee, it has become more edgy in a partisan way. Now, to the president's talk about mail-in balloting. It is not a road to fraud. That's not me. My source for that is the head of the Department of Homeland Security's Election Security Division. His name is Chris Krebs. I've talked to secretaries of state around the country, 8 of them at least on the record, 4 Democrats, 4 Republicans. It's not a pathway to fraud. Are there issues if your state has not done a lot of mail-in balloting before? Yes, there are. You need to have proper coding. You need to have proper ways to verify signatures on registration forms. You need to have a way to process a larger number of mail-in ballots, all of which can be done, but will take more time to do and some time to ramp up and prepare. We're quickly running out of time, so when the president raises all these flagrant, headline-grabbing alarms about mail-in balloting and fraud, he's pointing to something that might happen, but doesn't necessarily have to happen. And he has a remedy to make sure it doesn't happen. What is that? Provide states and local governments with the money to put on elections and the Postal Service the means by which to financially support more mail-in ballots. He's doing neither right now, which gives you some idea of what his actual thought pattern is about mail-in voting and whether or not it can be carried off successfully.